ladies. You may know that nonverbal communication is, 90% of what we try to convey when we're communicating. I, for one, believe this. I've had a baby for the last year who has gotten by with pointing, grabbing, reaching, leaning, and maybe an occasional squawk. But I just have come to appreciate that we as humans are wired to absorb information nonverbally, both to communicate and to connect, and sometimes to protect ourselves. So I want you to picture yourself as a judge. You have been given the job to pick a title holder from a group of amazing women. You have 8 to 10 minutes to discuss an interview with them face to face, and then they get to watch you from a distance on stage. Newsflash. Most of the pageant is nonverbal communication. Aside from your onstage question, and if you introduce yourself, you get to portray yourself based on your stance, your walk, your wardrobe, and your facial expressions. So if you walk into your interview slouching or quiet or unenthused, the judges are going to think you are scared to be there. They're not going to be able to visualize you as a title holder where you're going to be going around and talking to people all year. But if you walk in and you spend your interview with confidence, you've got good shoulders back, and you show that you want to be there by your attention, your eye contact, your gestures, your posture, they are reading into all of that and they are soaking up every bit they can get. And I do want to add a little caveat that we love our introverts in the house. We love you extroverts and everything in between. But I'm just going to say, if you are naturally more reserved and quiet, you might want to practice your confidence hat because if the judges sense that you are scared or nervous, they're not going to be able to visualize you as a public speaker or meeting business owners or government officials. So let's talk about postures, gestures, eye contact, and emotion.
Ladies, we're going to talk about eye contact and why it's so important in an interview. So I want to focus on 3 main things. First, when you make eye contact with your judging panel or just people in everyday life, you're showing that you're confident. You're showing that you're confident enough to meet that person's eye line and that you're not afraid and that you're not insecure. Second is credibility. When you make eye contact with somebody, you're showing that you're trustworthy or that you're credible. You've probably seen TV shows or been in situations where a character or a person you're talking to is shifting their eyes or looking up or looking down, and you're starting to wonder if they're shifty or if they're hiding something or just if they're insecure. But it does dampen somebody's credibility if they can't make eye contact with you or if you can't make eye contact with them. And third and finally is care. When you make eye contact with somebody, you're showing them that you care that they're there, that you care about them as a person, and that you're acknowledging their presence, that they're there in the room in this conversation with you. It's a very inclusive thing to make eye contact. So now that we've talked about why eye contact is important, let's talk about what happens where you're in a difficult situation where you get a question that scares you or throws you off and makes you want to look away or look down or look up. What do you do? Well, there are a few tricks. So if you're afraid and you're just thrown off by a pageant question or a competition question, you make sure to look in between the eyebrows of the judge asking you the question. That's one trick, because then it still looks like you're making eye contact with them even when you're not. Another trick is, as you're making eye contact between the judging panel, you can look in between, at the space in between the judges' heads. And that one I wouldn't recommend a ton of the time. It's usually if you're shifting between the judges. And this situation specifically that we're talking about, when you're a little intimidated by a question that's being asked, still keep in mind that you should, as a baseline, maintain eye contact. What we're talking about right here is just for those situations where you get thrown off. But again, what you can do in the situations when you're thrown off, you can look in between the eyes or in between the heads. The final point about eye contact I want to talk about today is what you're going to do when you get in your interview, the format of your eye contact specifically. So when a judge asks you a question, you're going to make eye contact with that judge who asked you the question. And then as you continue answering the question, you're going to move your eye contact down the line, making eye contact with every single person sitting at that table. And then once you've made eye contact with every single person sitting at that table, that's when you come back to the judge who originally asked you the question and you make eye contact with them again.
Depending on your program that you are competing in, you may or may not receive some training on onstage posture and how to present yourself. So let me just give you a little bit of tips on that. Might come across a little bit obvious, but I promise if you implement it, you will feel and see the difference of how you are presented on stage. Of course, standing up tall. How do we do this? If I'm sitting down like this, or not sitting, but even if I were standing, you can see a visual shift if I lift my chest. Okay, lift your chest, or if it helps, you can think you're gonna lengthen your abdomen, okay? And this makes a big difference. If I were standing, you would be able to see an obvious difference. So chest high, stretch out your abdomen, shoulders back, and then your neck, you're gonna think that it's tall, but you're gonna be moving your head around. So if you're looking down, looking up, neck tall, stomach tall, chest high, shoulders back, okay? This is how you're gonna be on stage. In an interview, a little bit more of an intimate setting, do you sit like this when you're talking to people in a genuine conversation? You want to look professional, but you also don't want to look stiff. So if you're in a conversation with someone, you might lean in a little bit, be a little bit more authentic. You can cross your legs if you're sitting, rest your arms on the podium, do what feels comfortable to you. But I will promise, if you walk in with that power pose, the same pose you're going to have on stage, of the tall, confident person that you are, they will see how excited you are to be there, and it will speak volumes. Let's talk about hand gestures. As I watch recent title holders, both on the national, state, local level, I see so much authenticity and excitement in these interviews. And a lot of it comes from being true to your hand gestures. If you are a person who's likely to talk with your hands, please do so. I'm here to tell you that if it feels natural to you to move your hands when you speak, please do it. This training is not about what gestures to use or what gestures not to use. Mostly it's about red flags. This here. Obviously I'm looking at myself in a camera, but if you are talking to somebody in an interview and they see you tucking your ear a lot, or if you are reaching for jewelry, that's something that I do a lot, is reaching for jewelry, or like, any sort of jewelry. Nervous, I'm tapping my foot, or if you're like tapping your hand, nervous, twitching, those type of things, those don't count as hand movements. Those are nervous tics, and those are the things that are distracting. So I want you to video yourself like this, watch back and see, oh, am I like shifting in weird ways? Am I doing one motion repeatedly? That's something that maybe you could look out for, because if I'm doing this, you kind of stop listening to what I'm saying and you start looking at, oh, she needs to stop clapping her hands. Okay, so I'm gonna show you a few interviews, just a little clips, and I want you to see, okay, this hand gesture really helps to explain what she's saying, or those look a little bit distracting. I'm gonna tell you, one of the interviews that I'm gonna show you, her hands are composed in her lap the entire time. Our Miss America 2025, she just looks professional and comfortable with her hands resting. I think that I would I would burst if I tried to hold too still. But that might be a cool practice if you want to try and implement that. If you want to feel a little bit more professional or reserved in how you come across, maybe try it. The teen video that I'm going to show, she is animated and excited with her hands, and this is something that just makes you feel relatable, okay? And you're gonna be your best critic. So I want you to watch these videos, watch the pros, and watch yourself, see what your hands are doing, because it makes a big difference. My rule of thumb, if someone's looking at your hands, your gestures are distracting and not enhancing what you're saying.
Now we get to talk about one of my favorite things when it comes to pageants, and that is emotion. One of my favorite quotes is by Maya Angelou, who said, "People will forget what you say and did, but they will never forget how you made them feel." And when you think about it, that quote is spot on. I mean, think about the people in your life who you love spending time with, whether it's your mom or your best friend or your dad, whoever. You don't usually say, "I like spending time with them because I really like the content of what they say." You're like, "No, I like spending time with them because of how they make me feel." They make me feel loved, or they make me feel safe, or they make me feel important, or like I have a purpose. And that principle applies directly to interview. I actually had an experience a few years ago where I learned just how important this principle of emotion is and how you make people feel when I was talking to one of my former head judges. So back in my day, when I was competing in pageants, I had the opportunity to sit down with this head judge, and she was giving me feedback, and she came out and said directly, "Jessie, I don't really remember what we talked about in your interview." And I remember sitting there for a second just being like, "Oh my gosh, you don't remember my interview? What? That was one of my favorites. Oh my gosh." But then she went on to talk a little bit more, and she was like, "I don't really remember what we talked about, but I do remember the feeling." And that was a really key moment for me, not just in pageants, but in life, because that is what people hold on to. This isn't to say that the content of your interview doesn't matter. It does, but the purpose and what we're getting at is emotion. And what people are going to remember in the long term, like years later, when this competition is said and done, they're going to remember how you made them feel. So how do we make people feel emotion? How do we connect with people through emotion in our interview? Well, I'm glad you asked. First is I want you to write down or talk about 3 to 5 life-defining moments. This is important because 3 to 5 life-defining moments, we want 3 to 5 because you have a limited amount of time in your interview. And we want you to talk about life-defining moments because that's what makes you who you are. And the whole reason why we're doing this interview is so the judges can get to know you in this short time frame. So brainstorm and think about 3 to 5 life-defining moments. One for me, for example, was when I had a cancer scare at 15 years old. That obviously brought up a lot of emotions for me, and it definitely defined the rest of my life. It makes up a big part of who I am. So, first step, figure out those life-defining moments. The next step is to practice talking them through. And you're not just going to practice talking them through. I think it's a good idea to film yourself or to watch yourself talking about them in the mirror or to talk about it with a friend. But I would say the best course of action is to film yourself for about 5 minutes a day talking through this life-defining moment. Because when you film yourself, you have the opportunity to watch it back. And I think that's the best course of action because when you watch it back, you get the chance to ask yourself, am I conveying the emotion I wanted to convey? I felt really happy in this memory. I felt really happy in this life-defining moment. Is that coming across when I talk about it? So I think that's a really good idea to do that at least 5 minutes a day. And by talking through these life-defining moments, you come across the details that really generate a lot of emotion. Like, for example, with my life-defining moment of having a cancer scare, as I talked through it out loud, I realized that one of the key moments for me as part of that life-defining moment was being at a restaurant with my mom after a doctor's appointment, feeling so much uncertainty and expressing to my mom, I'm worried if I'm even gonna get to go to my sophomore prom. Like, talking through that life experience helped me figure out which specific parts of it really made me feel something. And that helped me know what I wanted to talk about in my interview. The next and final part of this exercise of generating emotion in your interview, after you find the 3 to 5 life-defining moments, you're talking about it, you're filming yourself and watching it back. Next, you want to watch the pros. So this just means watching interviews. And it could be pageant interviews, it could be Jimmy Fallon interviews, it could be Vogue's 72 question interviews, whatever it is, watch those interviews back and see who makes you feel something. What is it that they did to make you feel something? What ones speak to you, or what do you want to emulate? Ask yourself those questions, and you will, by doing these 3 things, finding 3 to 5 life-defining moments, talking it through, and watching the pros do it, you'll be well on your way to having an amazing interview where judges will feel your heart and feel your emotion.